plan. We're driving up this rocky, steep, windy road, and it's taking a long time. And then, like, just real clearly and loudly, I could hear this, what sounded like corroboree, you know, like people dancing, singing. I could just hear it so clearly.
Welcome to Tell Me a Ghost Story, the late night call-in podcast where we delve into the world of the supernatural and explore the eerie and unexplained. I'm your host, Michelle Newman. This podcast features true stories from our callers that will send shivers down your spine and leave you questioning the existence of the afterlife. So grab a cozy blanket, turn down the lights.
Welcome to the Proppa Scary Podcast, where we dive into the unknown with stories from First Nations people from Australia and beyond. I'm Lisa. I'll be your guide through the shadows. We're coming to you all the way from Australia and hosting this episode of Tell Me a Ghost Story. Let's get into it.
My name is Shay. I'm from Western Australia. I just want to jump on and share a yarn that happened to me and my brothers growing up. We'd always been told that a spirit followed around the men in our family in each generation. Well, from when they were boys to when the spirit thought that they were men. I guess at the time I'd always look for logic, and I still kind of do this, but look for logic or lessons from, cultural yarns or spiritual yarns rather than being really scared about them and focusing on the paranormal side of it. But this one kind of changed my perspective. My brother and I had a room right across from each other, and my little brother's was sort of up the stairway and a little bit further away. But I guess from about 13, 14, my brother would hear these taps on the window, and there was a tree close enough for me to think, okay, it's the tree, especially on windy days. I grew up in Esperance, 8 hours south of Perth. It can get pretty windy, and I just thought it's the trees. But he would message me sometimes when he got really scared and ask me to either come sleep in his room or he would come and sleep in my room. And this would happen on and off, I guess, growing up. Was never really consistent until he, started to get a bit older and was ready to move out and was going through, all the type of things that young men do, and was facing new challenges. And yeah, right as he, I guess, was coming to the point where you go from a boy to being a bit older, a bit more mature, he was about to move out, and it started to really ramp up. So you'd get these tapping on the windows. We'd have uncles that would sleep over, get really scared because they would stay in his room when he was away, and they would hear voices or hear people saying stuff like, this is Tate's room. Tate is my brother's name, so they would say stuff like that. We were always thought that, they're just trying to keep that tradition alive, especially now that my brother's older and was older at the time, and me and my little brother were still young. And then my brother eventually moved out, and I wanted to take his room because it was bigger. And I was in there starting to move my stuff in there, and I was in there playing the PlayStation once, and my little brother comes running down the stairs and running straight past the doorway. I saw him go past and into the laundry, and then he turns back around and walks up to me and goes, how long have you been sitting in here for? And I said, a while, I'm halfway through a game. And he says,
well, then who was standing at the doorway and who did I chase into the laundry?
So I got really scared because then I was like, was something watching me while I was playing the game? And then I guess it all culminated in probably one of the scariest things I've ever experienced in my life. That week, my brother had come back to stay for a couple of days. He wanted his room back, and I stayed in my room. We heard my little brother scream at the top of his lungs in the middle of the night. And me and my brother came out of our rooms at the same time, ran upstairs. He wasn't in his room, so we got really scared, ran up to our mum and dad's room, and my mum was already waiting for us. And she said, hang on, don't go in there. And my brother must have been in the room with my dad, getting calmed down. And the next day we asked him what had happened. And he said to us that he woke up in the middle of the night because he couldn't breathe. And when he did wake up, there was a hand that looked like a spider covering his face and his mouth and suffocating him. Then, that's when he screamed. My dad, the next day, had to get an elder around, smoke the house, talk to whatever was their language, tell them that we no longer wanted them around because they scared us and we can look after ourselves. And that was the last that we ever were bothered by whatever that was. To this day, I still get really scared, and it's completely changed my perspective on things. And just thought I'd share that one because that was really, really scary at the time.
Thanks, Shay. I don't know if I would have moved into my brother's room after what had happened in there, but I guess having a bigger room is always more important when you're a kid. And I bet your little brother didn't fight you over it either. Next message.
I'm Cass from northwestern New South Wales area, and I just wanted to talk about a story that happened to me when I was quite young and has stayed with me. All my life I've been told about Min lights, and that basically just stay away from them. Us kids, we get told these stories, but I don't know, you don't always necessarily believe it. But we were travelling through the mountainy bit towards the Gold Coast from Western New South Wales. It was pitch black, dead night. I don't know why we left so late. Maybe because it was so hot and night time's nice and cool. But this is a time when you could have more than 3 people on the back and not have to worry about police officers. And the front seat, my stepdad was driving, my mum's in the front, my brother's on the right side of the door, then it's me, my little sister Shanae, and my stepsister Tash. And we're driving through in the middle of the night. My brother's asleep against the door. Us girls are all just mucking around. And my mum turns to my stepdad and says, pull the F over, pull the F over. It's like, we're in the mountain, there's nowhere we can pull over. I don't effing care, pull over, pull over. And as he started pulling over, a bright red min light sits right underneath the rearview mirror, just floating there. We're all freaking out, and just as my stepdad starts to pull over, the door on my brother's side falls off. And he's hanging out the door, and we're pulling him in, and as soon as we get him pulled in, we've pulled over and the car's stopped, the min light's still there. We're all looking at this min light. As soon as I swear I blinked, it disappeared out towards the black nothingness of the mountains. We took a moment and we waited until the min light disappeared before I guess we started again, and we had to put the door back on and use some tape and stuff like that. And ever since then, when my mum says you don't follow min lights, I always believed it now.
Thanks for your story, Cass. In the Kimberley of Western Australia, some mob actually believe that these lights are the spirits of elders. Larrakia man from Darwin, Australia, Dr. Curtis Roman, conducted research on the phenomena and was flooded with stories from people that had encountered these lights. He found that Indigenous people from the bush were not scared of the lights. I could not say that for people that resided in urban areas. Many reported the sightings had taken place near water, and many described the lights moving like a snake, which might link back to Indigenous Australians' beliefs of the rainbow serpent. The old people were definitely looking after you all that night. Thanks, Cass. Hi, my name's Lisa. I'm from Gomeroi Nation, and I want to share a yarn with you about the time I lived in the rainforest and a woman spirit that lived in the community. as a young woman in my 20s, I moved with my boyfriend at the time, deep in the rainforest. The community was only accessible by four-wheel drive, and the road was hilly, windy, and bumpy. We lived in a tin shack, pretty much open to the elements, but we had everything we needed, except for electricity, water. But we made do, cooked on the fire every day, swam in the river, but we really didn't need too much to live in the bush. It was quite an amazing time to live up there. So we lived up there for a few months, and I'm not going to use the name of the place out of respect for the traditional owners from that place. The more I stayed there, the more I learned about country, spirits, and the more I got to hear and even see. I feel like when you're all away from the distractions of the big city, and you're in these quiet places in the bush, that you're open to other levels of being, new levels of seeing. So I just wanted to share this story about one spirit woman who lived in that community. The stories were that this woman, non-Indigenous woman, was murdered during the Australian Gold Rush era. That was an era that was particularly violent. A few different versions of that story I heard, but one of them was that she was down the river, washing clothes or bathing, and was murdered at the river. The offender was a man, and so from then on, in her spirit form, she continues to act out revenge or torment men. There's also a waterfall on that country. There were stories about her pushing men off the waterfall that tried to cross the waterfall, again as an act of revenge because of the way that she had died. My boyfriend experienced her as well. One night he was outside mucking around, and she screamed in his ear, and that wasn't uncommon for the spirit woman to scream in men's ears and really frighten them. Get an eerie feeling just thinking about it and talking about it, because she's such a strong presence. And now that I think back to a number of different incidences, I think that maybe I was being watched more than I knew. The river, each day that I'd go down, and always felt like you were being watched. And then walking, from one house to another, sometimes on my own, you'd be walking along that dirt road and you could hear the pebbles. It just seemed like super noisy, the amount of pebbles and stones that were flying up from my shoes. And when I turned around, you could still see them sort of rolling down the road. And it was almost like somebody was walking behind me, but no one was there. I was just mucking around down at our shack there one morning, and I could hear one of the troopies, Toyota Land Cruisers, cruising up the road. And I looked up the top of the hill just to see who it was, because, there's not much going on, and you want a radar, want to see what everybody's doing. And I looked up at the top of the road. One of the other fellas that lived there, he was cruising in the troopy down to someone's house to do something. And there was a woman sitting in the passenger seat. And I just remember her hair, this long blonde hair, just flying out the window, like your head half out the window and your hair's blowing out while you're sitting in the car. And she sort of looked down at me and gave me a really nice warm smile. And then, they passed by. Anyway, that person who was driving that car, later on their way back, they dropped into our camp. And I was like, oh, who was that in the car with you? And he was in the passenger seat. And he reckoned, what are you talking about? I was like, that woman. And he reckoned, I was on my own. And I was just spinning out because it's like seeing someone for real and then afterwards finding out that they weren't real and just, questioning yourself and your mind and thinking, am I going crazy? Because that looked like a real person to me. So yeah, that was a really crazy experience for me. And even still to today, I can still see the image of that woman. And so yeah, that was a bit of a spin out. When everything's so quiet and so still, it's almost like you're able to connect with so much more than you would in the busy cities where there's all those distractions. And yeah, there was one night we were driving home in the dark and driving up this rocky road. It was a long way till we got to our camp, but we're running late, so this meant that we were driving at night time. Had the windows down, we got some music playing. We're driving up this rocky, steep, windy road, and it's taking a long time. And then, just real clearly and loudly, I could hear what sounded like corroboree, like people dancing, singing. I could just hear it so clearly. And I remember saying to my boyfriend at the time, "Hey, who's in the bush over there? Who would that be?" Because I knew that nobody lived in that part. And he's like, "Yeah, no one, that's just the spirits." When it rained, because we lived in this shack, and it had no windows and that, you could hear lots of mumbling, talking. But no one else was there but us. We'd be laying in bed just listening to it, people standing next to your bed, having a conversation, but you can't make out what they're saying because I believe, that it was the old people and the ancestors talking in language. Boyfriend would say that's because they love it when it rains. It's almost like party time, and that's when them spirits come out and enjoy themselves. So that's why we could hear them. It was just such a special experience that I'll never forget, and I'll never forget the families that I was able to live with and thank them for the protections, because I was a long way from home and I was a stranger to that country. The last story I'll tell you, the wet season was coming and we weren't prepared. We didn't have enough food or stores to make it through the wet season. So we made a decision to go back into town and just wait it out, and just packed up everything, packed up the car and took off. And we had to cross a couple of big rivers because by that time the rain had already started and the rivers were already starting to get pretty high. And I had like a Toyota 4Runner forward drive, and it was an old one, but it did the job. We had to cross one river, went through real good, and then the second river, it was big. Started driving through, and we had some family on the other side of the river just had driven through it just before us, directing us which way to go. And we got halfway through this massive river, the water's flowing. It's right up to the side of the doors, nearly to the windows. I'm freaking out. And they said, no, just keep coming. And then next minute, the car just stops. We're going to be swept down this river in this car. That's it, finished. And then fellas yelling out, no, just start again. Turn the ignition, turn the key one more time. The car was stalled, turned the key. All of a sudden, it just started up again. And then we were able to finish off driving through that river. And so I always had that feeling that being looked after by them ancestors, or even, my own ancestors who travel with me everywhere I go as well, because I felt like that was a near-death experience, but it's so freaky that car just stopped and next minute to start it and get out of there. I'm so grateful for those experiences.
Oh yeah, this is Paul here from Maningueta region, and I just wanted to tell a story about an event that happened out here in the bush. And we were out fishing one day. Dropped off a few fellas about a kilometre down the road, and we went back to the area where we were sitting down with the fire, and we were wondering if them guys wanted to get picked up. So we went back over there, and while we were driving, a family saw people on the back of the truck. They were asking us when we got back, who was them people standing on the back of the truck? And we said, oh, there was no one, it was just the driver and myself. Yeah, but people could see them standing on the back of the truck. And yeah, so we were like shocked by that and didn't know what was going on. So later on that night, we packed up, started raining, went back to the outstation where we were staying, and a strange event started happening. The car turned on by itself, and the horn was beeping. Yeah, no one was in the car. And yeah, that was the scariest night of my life. And yeah, I couldn't believe that this could occur. Yeah, I just didn't want to believe it, but there was something actually there, like an entity. And yeah, it scared the hell out of us. The next day I packed up and I said, I've had enough, I'm going Darwin now. But yeah, later on in Darwin, I think this thing followed me, and sitting by myself and could hear like tapping on the window. So I decided to pray, and yeah, everything was okay after that. And try to be brave. I turned every light on in the house. It was, crazy. Yeah, there are things out there, and yeah, it's a scary world, but I think if you feed it fear, and things will happen. If you a person that doesn't believe, then maybe nothing will happen because you're not feeding it. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for your story, Paul. I wonder if the spirits were trying to tell you something, or just trying to catch a ride somewhere. Whatever it was, I think the night your car started by itself, maybe the spirits had become impatient and they decided they were going to drive themselves to wherever it was they were going. But then they realised that nobody could drive. As in, no one had a body? Anyway, next message.
My name's Tim here. My mob's from up Armidale, Kempsey Way, Goombandry tribe. Stories from country. Okay, so my particular story, I've got two versions of this story. Well, one from up Armidale Way and one from down Newcastle Way on a what we call land. So up Armidale, a few years back, this is going probably nearly 15 years ago now, myself and a few friends were camping at the Merrick Dam for his birthday, and late that night we decided to go for a walk around the dam and find somewhere to set up a little campfire and just chill out. And we come across a big boulder in the ground, so we decided to set up there and hang out. Fire was going, we were just chilling, and it was probably getting close to 1 o'clock in the morning, and my mate fell asleep, and it was just me and my other mate being still awake, and I wanted to stay awake because I didn't trust being out there and not being in a tent. So I was just like, yeah, all right, let's stay awake. And I decided to keep myself awake by going for a bit of a walk down the track a little more. And I got down, I probably got about 200 meters or so away from where we were set up, and I was looking in front of me where it was getting a little bit dense. The bush was getting a bit more close together and darker, and I hesitated for a little bit, and then I heard a loud thud, like something had fallen from a tree or something had jumped from a tree. And then as I looked in that direction, I couldn't see anything, and I heard loud, large footsteps bipedal footsteps for sure. They were walking through the long grass towards me. You could hear it walking through the grass. It was really weird. I wasn't going to hang around to find out what that was. So I kind of just freaked out. I let out a loud profanity and took off and never went back down that way. It wasn't until a couple of years ago now, like probably just over 2 years ago now, I went back there and during the day, and I was just like, whoa, this brings back a lot of memories. And I had eyes in the back of my head that day. I was a little worried about what was going on around me at the time, but nothing too crazy. But yeah, that was my first sort of experience in the bush. So it was a little bit strange. I mean, I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. And whatever it was large and it was walking towards me and it was on 2 feet. Then quite the different type of story, but very similar. We moved down here to Newcastle and been here for quite a number of years. And I went out to a place called Taralba in Newcastle, a suburb of Newcastle, Taralba. There's a bit of bushland out there. We were moving out there to a house that was getting built. It was just me and my son. He was 10-year-old at the time. We went for a walk along this bush track. Now, I had been up and down these bush tracks during COVID when you can go out and do exercise. Nothing out of the unordinary happened. It was this one day that changed the game. We went out there and we were just talking about the house, and as we were walking along, we're coming up this hill and you could see the bushland to our left. There was a bit of a gully just down below, but it was good 20 meters away from where we were walking. Anyway, we're walking along, just chatting and having a yarn, and you could hear what it sounded like, large bipedal footsteps in the bush beside us. My son, he heard it and he goes, "Dad, could you hear that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I can't see anything, so let's just keep walking." So we kept walking, and as we stopped and kept walking, it would do the exact same. It was mimicking our footsteps. It was very loud. And at that point, I decided to look to my left, and I had seen this very large, grey, hairy figure walking through the trees. And my first thought at the time, like, I tried to rationalise it. I thought maybe it was a kangaroo, considering the grey hair or grey fur or whatever you wanted to call it. But that kangaroo that I was trying to rationalise it to didn't bounce away, didn't make itself noticeable. And I was like, okay. Then I thought of maybe it was a person in a grey t-shirt, but it wasn't that. And this thing, mind you, this thing was huge. It was probably like 7 foot to 8 foot tall. The shoulder, it was like I was looking at the back of this thing's shoulders. The shoulders were like broad. They were at least 1.5 meters to 2 meters in width. If I could say, that's probably the closest thing I could say. It was about, 20 meters away from where we were, and this thing had walked behind 2 gum trees and took a step outside on one side, the other on the gum tree, and just vanished into thin air. I was dumbfounded to know what I'd just seen or where it could have gone. My son was freaking out. He wanted to go home. He needed to go to the toilet. But yeah, I was, me being me, growing up in an Aboriginal family in Australia, talking about all these ghost stories and all these stories about Bigfoot, or not Bigfoot, a hairy man, but our version of Bigfoot here in Australia, Yowie. And I've always believed, but never have I ever thought I'd come across one or see one. So here we were this day, had seen something that matches the description, matches all the stories and the actions, and it was just crazy to think that I had seen something like that just vanish, like something so big just vanish into thin air. And there was at this point I was like, I better go up and find out where this thing went. and how it just disappeared into thin air. And my son was like, "Can we go now?" I was like, no, I want to find out what the go is. I was pretty brave, but me being me, I paranormal investigate, and I've always been interested in stuff like this. So I was just sort of trying to figure out what did I just see. And this was a broad daylight, mind you. This was like midday. And anyway, we went up to this tree where it disappeared, and I looked around, looked up, looked everywhere, tried to look for tracks. There was nothing. Something so big and so loud while it was walking didn't leave a mark in the ground. So I hear stories all the time about them being possibly fifth dimensional beings and just, coming and going when they please, or maybe even like camouflage. But if that thing was still around and still hanging around, it would have been right there, right next to where I was looking at this tree for it. But yeah, it was very strange, to say the least. But yeah, like I said, this thing, it was huge. It was very noticeable. It was very loud. It wasn't very scary, but yeah, whatever it was letting us know that it was there, but it wasn't at all trying to harm us or scare us away. It was just walking along like we were. And yeah, just found it funny that at first it tried to hide itself away behind our footsteps, and I've now come to know that a few other stories that I've listened to that they do that. It's not like a stalk, but it's like, I can't remember the name for it, but they try and, hide themselves behind your footsteps, but even though their footsteps are massively loud compared to ours. I even tried to debunk it as much as possible. I got one of my cousins to walk up through there, and he was a pretty tall boy at the time. He was pretty solid as well, and I told him to walk up into that spot where I seen it, and I stood in the same spot where I saw it the first time, and no comparison whatsoever. I could barely hear him walking through the bush. And when I seen him, he wasn't as big as this thing was. So yeah, quite the interesting story. That's pretty much it. If you're interested in anything, head over to our We're Haunted TikTok. Glad to be on the podcast, and thank you all for listening.
Wow, thanks, Tim. That's a proper scary yarn. I was actually reading that the Woodingan National Park in New South Wales, which is not far from where you had your encounter, is actually a hotspot for Yowie sightings. And lots of people have reported some encounters with some 8-foot tall hairy creature. And some even saying that they were stalked and chased through bushland, similar to you. So yeah, that's pretty wild stuff. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the stories from our podcast. And a big thank you to Michelle for inviting us to host this episode of Tell Me a Ghost Story. We'd love to hear from Indigenous people from around the world. If you're listening to this podcast and you want to connect, you can email me on propascarypodcast@gmail.com or connect with us in TikTok, proppa.scary.pod. I hope to hear from you soon. Find the Proppa Scary Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Again, thanks to Michelle. We're so happy to be involved with the podcast. And until next time, stay out of the shadows.
That's all we have this week, folks. Do you have a ghost story? Call 701-484-2666. That's 701-484-2666. Or go to tellmeaghoststory.com and leave your story there. Thank you to all the callers who left messages this week. And as always, I'm your host, Michelle Newman, signing off. See you next week.